Have you guys ever tried killing a dino doomstack with Beastmen? Well, let me tell you, it's not very fun, because in a straight up fight, it's not very doable. There's a concept in fighting games called a 7-3 matchup, where in a best of 10 series between two equally skilled opponents, one character has such an advantage based on their moveset that as long as they play averagely, they'll win maybe 7 out of 10 games. To put it more simply, the situation isn't entirely insurmountable for the disadvantaged party, but it's pretty bad, and it can't get a whole lot worse. Thankfully, there aren't a lot of matchups like this in Total War Warhammer 2. I'd say the 6-4 and 5-5 scenarios between races are a lot more common, but there are a handful that can be pretty unpleasant to play, and Lizardmen vs Beastmen is one of them, if you're a fan of the goat dudes and cow people anyway, and the reason for that is that there's a gigantic gaping hole in their roster that's been begging for a fill-in since July 2016. If you had to guess right now, in a battlefield scenario, what would you say Beastmen struggle against the most? Well, if you answered heavily armored single-entity monsters, you win a cookie, because that is absolutely their biggest weakness and has been for quite some time. The Beastmen are a hit-and-run faction built around momentum and quickly dropping enemy leadership. Huge charge bonus, overwhelming speed, and the best hunters of routing units in the entire game. They excel at blending infantry with chariots, at flanking and outmaneuvering an opponent, then preying on their skirmishers and their ranged firepower. But where they tend to run into trouble is in drag-it-out fights with armored monsters, and examples of this exist all over YouTube, of Beastmen jumping out to an early lead, crushing their opponent's infantry and skirmish play, then being forced to blob around a handful of remaining monsters where they can fall prey to AoE spells and massive tail thwaps, and simply cannot deal enough damage before the terror routes start kicking in. And then when they mass route, it's game, set, match from there. There are campaign builds that can get around this fact. You can doomstack with Gorbals and a thick, juicy minibus, and if you don't like actually playing battles, you can stack Brace Shaming Leadership debuffs and never have to play the game again. But as we know, Al Gorbal likes taking the train to Funky Town, gets yeeted across the planet anytime a creature bigger than a Volvo looks at him funny, so I'd argue he's not the most reliable monster duelist. He's not bad, he just can't really stay on target all that well, and your infantry isn't going to be much help either. So I was trying to get a good Dreadsaurian replay the other day, and playing with and against it, and it got me thinking about armored single-entity monsters in general, from Shaggus to Arachnarok spiders to War Sphinxes, and everything in between, and in particular, how the Beastmen deal with them. And the answer right now is very poorly. That isn't to say the Beastmen are completely helpless or that they're a bad faction in general, but their difficulties in dealing with these type of enemies is almost entirely a result of their unit roster. Tentacore throwing axes are awesome, but they have no range and limited ammo. Ungor Raiders would be amazing if they could be paired with Plague of Rust from the lore of Metal, but they can't. You only have one Halberd unit across the entire roster, Korok's Manrippers. Razorgore Herd are great for their mass, AP, and cost efficiency, but their leadership just doesn't hold up against terror. And Giants are, well, Giants. They have 1,000,001 problems, as I'm sure we're all aware by now. So when players are turning to them to try to beat up on Dino Stacks or Shaggoth Goon Squads, you know the situation is a little bit rough. And things are only going to get worse as Rogue Idols and Greater Demons and the other abominations of Warhammer 3 enter the mortal planes. So it's high time the Beastmen get an armor-piercing bonus versus large bruiser that can help them deal with a single-entity nightmare that has plagued their waking dreams for almost 4 years now. Enter the Gorgon, not to be confused with Hot Snake Waifus or the decapitated Primarch of the Iron Hands. This is a creature born of rage and gluttony, a mutated minotaur grown as tall as a giant and infinitely more grotesque. By consuming mountains of tainted meat in their never-ending quest for food, they become racked with change, growing an extra pair of bladed limbs and a warped, slavering maw. On the tabletop, they run at movement speed 7, which should allow them to keep pace with and potentially outstrip some heavy knights of Bretonnia and the Empire in Total War, and that 10 leadership means they will always be one of the last creatures to rout. That's upwards of 90 to 100 in Total War Warhammer 2. They would have Bloodgreed, Frenzy, Immune to Psychology, the new Woodsman trait for unfettered movement through forest, and I'd argue, for a bit of additional flavor, they should be one of the few monstrous units in the game that should be able to hide in trees, like Minotaurs. There are already a handful that can, like Treemen for the Wood Elves, but they're not quite fast enough to make use of the ability to ambush an enemy force from the woods. Gorgons would be. They'd be moving about 70 speed possibly, so that would absolutely allow them to close the gap from an ambush scenario. Now they have 3 special rules that grant unique properties in Warhammer Fantasy and AOS, and these are called Swallow Whole, Strength from Flesh, and Ravenous Bloodgreed. Now, in the source material, Swallow Whole allows the Gorgon to make a slower but more devastating attack at Initiative 1. But I don't think this would necessarily have a gameplay impact in Total War. Just roll it into the animation set and call it a day. Fairly straightforward there. But Strength from Flesh is what gives the Gorgon its staying power, functioning like the Hunger or the Warp Sword of Cain. When it's out of melee, no regen whatsoever for the monster, but when it's up close and personal, it gets double, between 6 and 8 regen per second. And the lore implication there is that as it feasts on its enemies, the unholy energies that allow it to maintain its massive bulk, reknit open flesh, and heal nasty wounds. Now, Ravenous Blood Greed is what I'm using to say the Gorgon should have bonus first large, because a very similar rule for the Charybdis transitioned to Total War in the exact same manner, where a good roll on your first flurry of attacks inflicts additional wounds on the target at hand. But frankly, I think it's kind of irrelevant. There's a clear hole in the Beastmen roster on that front. There's no reason to avoid AP and bonus first large for a creature like this one, and it's the role that it really should be filling. So what are the weaknesses of an abomination like this one? Well, on the tabletop, Frenzy and Blood Greed function very differently. So units with those traits, like Minotaurs or Blood Knights or Forsaken, could be led by the nose around the board, forced to finish off units they really didn't want to be focusing on. Obviously, that's not how they work in Total War, but this monster is very much a glass cannon with fantastic damage output, but a lack of scaly skin and protection from missile fire. Like a giant, it has very little armor, a huge hitbox, and it'll be less efficient at dealing with blobs of infantry compared to Minotaurs or Chariots. But that's okay, because that is not the role the Beastmen needed to play. They need something that can go toe-to-toe with dinos and have a chance of winning. So what we get from a Gorgon is a visually unique and thematic monster that, unlike the giant, actually synergizes with the Beastmen style of combat. It's fast enough to keep up with your mobile elements, it can ambush, it is scarily good at flanking, which is something that most monsters in this game don't do very well. It regens in melee, and it's best used in a hit and run style, striking hard and striking fast, then using its speed to stay one step ahead of an opponent, which is pretty much the Beastmen in a nutshell. While I feel like the Gorgon is pretty much a no-brainer, it's hardly the only big monster that got left in the dust when Call of the Beastmen came out back in July of 2016. The Jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the Tolgi wood and burbled as it came. Charlemagne the God rules all of us, a creature that would have taken the entire art budget of the Charlemagne DLC to produce, the Jabberslythe. Now, in a perfect world, we would get both and not have to make any tough decisions whatsoever. But in a Lord Pack scenario, it's incredibly rare for CA to add two massive monsters for the exact same roster. When we got Dreadsaurian, we didn't get the Troglodon. When we got the Charybdis, we didn't get the Medusa until later, and so on. And if we're forced to choose, I definitely feel like the Gorgon is a more important addition for the Beastmen roster. It's way more thematic, it visually matches up with the Beastmen much better, and the Jabberslythe could fit into really any Chaos-themed army, while the Gorgon is unmistakably Beastmen. But playstyles and battlefield role are the most important elements here. The Jabber is more of a flying Mortis engine than a bonus first large monster killer. It has some really cool mechanics, don't get me wrong, like Bile Blood that spurts out and wounds anything that tries to wound it, and an Aura of Madness that causes nearby enemies to attack each other as they go insane. You can literally stab the Jabberslythe with a spear in the flank, and it will spurt out Bile Blood that will melt your face off. But here's the thing, Beastmen don't need help mulching infantry. They're already exceptional in that role. That is exactly what a Mortis-like DOT from a Jabberslythe would function like. It's meant to blend infantry, not kill monsters. Then we get the whole animation aspect to its flight, those tiny-ass wings up top on a gigantic jiggly body, and I can see the appeal. It's hilarious, it's awesome, it's scary to look at, and while I fully believe Creative Assembly could do a great job with it, with all those animations, I'm frankly not sure it should be able to fly, given the tiny-ass wings on its model. Same reason Necrosphinx won't fly in Warhammer 2 or Warhammer 3. It might look hella goofy. Just to be clear, I am not anti-Jabberslythe at all. It is a really cool unit. I'd be very happy to see it, especially after all the memes we've dealt with over the last couple of years, and it might just be the perfect screw you guys, look what we can do from Creative Assembly after all the Beastmen backlash back in 2016. But it fits less with the roster visually and in terms of its gameplay, and that means picking which one to tackle should be fairly straightforward. If one has better alternatives on both aspects, I'd say it's the go-to, and I'm definitely on the Gorgon train if we must choose between the two, which is typically how things go. We typically have to make a choice with one or the other when we're talking about the big headlining DLC monsters. So what I'm hoping is that Wood Elves vs Beastmen is next on the agenda. that they will be handled just like Marcus Wolfhart was for the Empire. Game 1 race added to the Vortex campaign in Game 2. It's a great way to get around the DLC for DLC issue. It's already been done multiple times now with minimal backlash. Ground the Punch is the most recent example, and it'll come with a rework to both campaigns for the Wood Elves and for the Beastmen. Now, from a battlefield perspective, it's pretty damn clear the Beastmen have been struggling with armored monsters for a long time. Whether you're talking about Stegodons, Dragon Ogre Shaggus, Ragnarok Spiders, War Sphinxes, greater demons like Keeper of Secrets, or a Bloodthirster, God forbid, and then stuff like Rogue Idols coming in the Grom and the Punch DLC, it's only going to get worse for the Beastmen as we head into Warhammer 3 when the big guns come out to play. But the fact that they struggle in this role is an entirely manufactured issue that has nothing whatsoever to do with a purposeful, designed hole left in their army book by Games Workshop. Obviously, not every race should have everything, but they had this all the way back in 7th edition, and it was a great addition for the Beastmen, and it would be a great addition here. They absolutely have the tools to compete in the source material to bring down big monsters in the source material. They're just lacking some of those things in Total War, and it's time for that to change. So what do you guys think in the eternal Jabberslythe versus Gorgon debate? How would you design each unit? What's the best way to implement them in Total War? And what would you like to see in a Beastmen update as Warhammer 2 winds down and we chug along towards Warhammer 3? Let me know in the comment section below, and I'll see you all in the next video.